So, hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's panel on the future of education. I am honored to bring to the screen our two phenomenal panelists, John Gamba and Nunzio Quacquarelli. How are you both feeling today? Hopefully, it's not been too much of a long day for either of you, and thank you so much for tuning in with us.
Great. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Harsha.
Great to see you, Harsha.
Yep, and jumping right in, I think first of all, we just ended with both of your keynote sessions. Wow, what an amazing, I would say, introduction to our summit. As I was telling, as we were chatting before this, I was saying education is something that I feel was the perfect way to begin today's conference. Simply because if you look around you to the students behind the scenes, if you look beyond the screen and into the audience as well, everyone here are essentially student entrepreneurs or they are individuals who contribute to kind of the student entrepreneurship ecosystem. And it has been really, really heartwarming to see how all of these students have come together with the shared cause of providing equal access to information, experiences such as yours to other students their age as well. If you saw our MCs earlier, quick shout out to them. We had Sunit from the Toronto Film School, who was also one of my co-founders at Ascendance, and we had Abhi, who is actually one of our student entrepreneurs. So she just graduated high school. She actually started her own venture in entrepreneurship as well. And all of us, from, as I said, the MCs to the support team to everyone in today's event, is super passionate about education. So first of all, thank you for the work that you guys have done in the space. And let's take a couple of minutes today in this panel to talk about where we think the education space is going, how we envision the future of edtech, of social entrepreneurship, education in and of itself, and how us students who are interested in this space can engage further with it as well. So to start off, I'd like to ask, why did each of you choose education? I mean, you both have very different stories. I think, Nunzio, you started off your QS as a student project while you were at the Wharton School, which is super cool. And John, you have been a serial entrepreneur in the education space with multiple amazing ventures. So I'm assuming both of you has some inkling or some love for education at the very least. So maybe diving off, Nunzio, maybe you can start us off. Why in the first place did you decide to run a project in education? And when you started it as a student project, did you see QS being as huge as it is today?
So the answer is to inspire and help the audience and generations of the audience that you have on this conference, because it's really these young, motivated people who can make the world a better place. And I started QS with a mission, and that mission has remained unchanged since 1990, which is to empower motivated young people anywhere in the world to fulfill their potential through educational achievement, international mobility, and career development. And I have found that mission incredibly motivating and inspiring, and has given me a passion my whole professional life. And I'm still highly motivated and passionate about that. So that's the fundamental reason. Practically, I knew about education. I was 24 when I started at the Wharton School. I was very young, but I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I knew about education. I'd obviously studied in it. I'd done a lot of research, and I felt that there was a gap in the information that was available. I felt that I could contribute to filling that gap, that asymmetry of information. And so I saw an opportunity. But once I started thinking that way and I defined the mission of QS, it's just been so inspirational.
So I guess to follow up on that, Harsha, education, I think, is in my genes. My father was a school board chairperson. I have a school board of a school district outside of Philadelphia. My mom's been a university and a community college professor. My sister's a Montessori teacher. So we always grew up with this sense of purpose related to education. But I think those genes were set far before I was born. My parents were first generation high school graduates. My grandparents never graduated from high school, but they always instilled in them the importance and power of education. My grandfather was a bridge painter in Newark, New Jersey. He painted bridges from 5 a.m. to 9 o'clock at night. Came home and the story was that he never would let my father hold a paintbrush because he was afraid he would like it. He said, no, you're going to school. My other grandfather told my mom that it was important for her to get her own education. They met at the University of Pennsylvania. That's another story, where I later graduated in 1992. And as they raised my sister and I, they always talked about how education was the pathway out, the pathway to greener pastures, the pathway to white collar jobs, the pathway to economic independence. And so the power of education was always there and set with us. And then I had a life dream come true where my father retired. He was my mentor in 1996, and he backed me on a ed tech incubator where we were founding, funding, and overseeing several ed tech companies back when there was no real ed tech, 1998, 1999, when the disruption was really just starting to happen in the area of education.
And if I could just add to that, John, that immigration has been such a driver for the pursuit of education, and I've got the same story. And my dad was Italian, impoverished after the Second World War. The family lost everything, so he came to the UK penniless. Didn't have any education. He left school when he was like 12, and he built a life for himself. But definitely, education is a way out for immigrant families. And again, that's one of the inspirations for QS. Absolutely.
I knew with the nouns, the vowels at the end of our names, that there was going to be a cosmic connection here, Nunzio.
There absolutely is, John. There absolutely is.
Okay, I like how you picked that up, John. I'm going to jump completely off script in a sense, just because on this topic, I completely agree in the sense of, and for me at least, again, someone whose family has always seen the emphasis of education, again, from grandparents to passing it on and growing up, they've always said that education is what's going to make you succeed. They, of course, lived in in plantations back at home in Malaysia, and always really loved the idea of education and loved the hope that their kids would be able to kind of grow out of where they were from education in a sense. How do you guys both of you have been in the education space for a long time. How do you see that mentality and perception towards education change over the last few years in a sense? It started off, I think, during at least even during my parents' generation, as something that can help you succeed, something that you need to go up the ladder in something that's going to rescue you from where you are today. But today we see many Gen Zs, or at least the statistics and perception saying that 1 in 3 of them don't see the need of education as much and would rather go into directly to work or something like that. What are your thoughts in this in a way? And how do you think we can, number one, at least how can we identify what is this change in perception towards education? And number two, how do you think we can re-engage more Gen Zs into meaningful education that would support them in the work that they do?
So I'll just jump right in by saying that I agree that what we're seeing is this seismic shift in the focus on what is education. So when I think of students going right into the workplace, I still think there's a process of education that goes into that. I think that there's an importance that we move from this military industrial complex where it's education systems of drill and kill, rote memorization, teaching to the test, to education systems that are built around the 4 C's: critical thinking, complex reasoning, creative problem solving, even character development. What I consider, or I call, the deeper learning movement. The more that we can develop critical thinking skills, creative problem solving skills, empathy, service orientation, the more we're going to be successful, I believe, in inspiring students to really take education seriously on whatever college and or career path that they may want to take.
All right.
I think those are great points, John. I would take more of an economist perspective and say that we're coming full circle. So in my father's generation, university education was seen as very remote and probably not necessary, because you could do an apprenticeship and you could develop an activity, a profession, even finance, or many professions had apprenticeship routes that didn't need a degree. And then we've just gone through the last 20 years where access to higher education has just ballooned, and higher education has become a prerequisite for any kind of white collar job, any serious pay job, and the salary gap between graduates and non-graduates has become absolutely huge, particularly in the US, but also in many countries around the world. I think in Malaysia, China, India, it's equally true. And yet now we see the onset of credentials and the unbundling of degrees. And all of a sudden, employers are saying, actually, we need specific skills in this 21st century digitally enabled workplace. And if universities aren't delivering those skills, we'll take credentials as an alternative. So, young people who are saying, well, do I want $150,000 of debt, or do I want to take some credentials and go straight to the workplace? They have a choice. And it's an interesting choice. Personally, I think it would be a generational tragedy if this generation then moves away from higher education, because I think there's so much more than knowledge that's acquired through higher education. It is that cultural understanding of being in an environment with people from lots of different countries, potentially actually being overseas yourself. It's the social skills, it's the extracurricular activities, the involvement in groups, running conferences like this that you gain experience in. There's so much more that the higher education experience gives you, just the knowledge. But there's a real risk. When we talk about, there's a real risk right now that higher education could become marginalized again, and we'll see. We're at a watershed moment.
No, very important. And I think more and more we see people rising to reduce those inequalities. That's also part of the reason why we're doing this summit. That's part of the reason why I think all of us, wherever we are trying to provide equal and equitable opportunities for people to engage with higher education. One thing that I think they touched on earlier is I actually run Ascendance. We work with 35,000 kids, 28 countries, 900 schools and communities. And one of the biggest things that we try to do is give kids in village areas, low-income families, rural areas, in a sense, the same opportunities that people as fortunate as I am to go to an Ivy League would have access to. And one of the ways we do that is through events like this. So thank you for being a part of it. And for everyone else, thank you for tuning in. If you want to support the work we do in helping provide equal and equitable options to students, we do have a crowdfunding page associated with this conference that you can contribute to. But moving into our discussion again, it's not just about how the perception of education is evolving. It's also the tools and the medium of how education is evolved over the last few years that I have been completely blown away by. I think technology itself has so quickly evolved that it has completely changed the way that we communicate, every aspect of it, whether it's in things like gaining and retaining information, or whether it's in the ways that we communicate the information we have. We see, especially Gen Zs, who make up the bulk of the students of today, they communicate in a completely different way than how I would say, students 10, 15, or even 5 years ago did. So I'm very curious, for each of you who run your ventures, how do you make sure that your ventures itself are constantly evolving with this industry? Because at the end user in education is always going to be the student, which are unfortunately or fortunately the most technologically evolved generation at any given time. So, for example, Nunzio, when you started, I think I read somewhere you actually started QS with guides in the 1990s, which is very cool. I just
I
see
come from the pre-internet era.
Yeah, so how did you evolve from that, in a sense, and make sure that you're constantly ahead of the curve, in a sense? You're constantly able to provide resources and information to your audience. Don't get me wrong, I use QS all the time. I remember when I got into Penn, I was like, what is the University of Pennsylvania? And then I Googled it and QS popped up. So it's a really valuable resource, but I'm sure a lot of time, energy, and planning has gone into making sure that the way you communicate this is in a way able to reach the target user. So
sure. And the honest answer is constant reinvention. I mean, the world moves at pace. Generation Z is going to change as well. It's not that that's a given. That their mindsets are going to change. Who knows how the metaverse is going to change things? And you have to be constantly researching your user group, understanding their mindsets. So QS is very much a research, data, insight-led business. So we are constantly, we survey 125,000 prospective students every year with our international student survey. We survey 170,000 academics every year for our World University rankings. We survey 75,000 employers every year as part of our World University ranking scheme. We're now developing alumni surveys as well. So massive surveying scale. We also, through our website, topuniversities.com, we do pulse surveys. So during the pandemic, we were able to report on how students were being impacted by the pandemic and how universities could respond in an effective way and how their responses were being perceived and regarded. So we could provide real-time information to universities so that they could help students in an effective way. So that constant research for QS is essential. And then just being willing to invest in reinventing ourselves. So, digital transformation. We're currently building massive data warehouse, massive data, AI, machine learning enabled, data analysis at scale, at global levels, huge data sets. It's constant change.
I pick up on that. I agree 100%. It's the world is flat. Everything's happening so fast. I just had a great conversation with the great Richard Collada, who's the CEO of ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education, about this very concept, the role of technology and how technology is just disrupting the education space. And when we talked about it, we said, my goodness, 2 billion learners at the time of the pandemic came online. What an opportunity for enormous disruption and to use technology as the great equalizer. And we talked a lot about what's happening in the area of technology, and I think it's important. Ease of adoption of new digital technology, digital learning solutions, the importance of interoperability and having these technology applications interoperate or integrate with existing LMS or SIS systems. These are all things that we work with our ed tech founders on to ensure that they are commercially viable. But I also think that technology is not enough. And the research supports that. If you look over the last, say, 20, 25 years at the disruption that's happened in tech, and you look at say the last 1,000 meaningful ed tech or education technology companies, and 950 of them probably failed, 25 of them have done pretty well, and then you have your 25 to 30 unicorns, right? We just had our first set of unicorns, billion-dollar valued companies. And the question is, as researchers at Penn's GSE, why? Why did they do well? And the answer isn't just tech. The answer is that fundamentally, the companies like the Dreamboxes, like the iExcels, like the iReadies, they have done 3 core things very well to be able to be as successful as they've been. One is that they're engaging their students. We talked a moment about this, that if you don't develop or deliver a Fortnite or a Minecraft-like experience for a student in a digital learning application, you really have no shot. They have to be engaged. There has to be gamification. There has to be leveling up, badges, great superior UX, or it's just not going to fly. Second is the pedagogical alignment, making sure that we know what are the outcomes that are being delivered as a result of using that product or service. The alignment to standards, the crosswalking, the determination of, how are we developing critical thinking or complex reasoning, metacognitive skills in the students that we're serving. That's number 2. And 3 is the ease of adoption, the use of technology and ensuring that the system specifications, the end-to-end user experience, all of those things are built with best practices, and best practices not only in software development, but best practices in privacy, security, making sure that data is secure. So I'm a big fan of technology. Obviously, that we do a lot of ed tech work, but I don't think that it's enough. I think you need to take a more comprehensive or holistic look at what makes an ed tech product commercially viable, sustainable, and ultimately scalable.
No, definitely a very good point. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I do want to mention it to our audience. Please feel free to ask questions, because I have so many questions for our panelists that if you do not ask any, I will just go on and on. So audience, please ask questions. But to that point, I definitely agree. I think we have the best panel here because both of you have actually built your own ventures in the space. And as you said, not all ventures go on to succeed, but you both have been extremely, I would say, successful in your own individual spaces. So to kind of narrow down to your own unique challenges, maybe John, you can start us off this time. When you started, I think PACE, which was your one of your first adventures in a sense, one of the things that you mentioned during your sharing earlier was something that was critical to its success was the stakeholders and kind of engaging the different stakeholders in the ecosystem. So you had to get buy-in from teachers, you'd had to get buy-in from schools, from parents, from individual sponsors, and you had to do a lot of essentially outreach to be able to convince them to invest either their time, their funds, or even emotionally in what you guys were doing. So I'm very curious from your point of view, in a sense, first of all, how important is it to bring together all of these stakeholders for whatever it is we're working on, especially in a field like education, where so many people are involved, so many people essentially care about, in a sense? And also, how do you, or how were you actually able to gain the support of all of these different stakeholders in the education arena? It's not something easy, definitely, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it really does come down to some of the things I shared on my keynote. Well, it started with surrounding myself with people who are smarter than me. I happen to have a pretty solid sense of business strategy, but at the time that I started, I had no idea how to develop a technology product that could be sold into a K-12 environment, which is the product and platform that we were building. I had to find people that knew how to build a technology that could be integrated into a K-12 district securely, safely, with good privacy standards. Two is, really understanding what are the marketing and sales, what are the go-to-market strategies that needed to be put in place to be able to identify a need inside of that environment. Not vitamins here, serious pain, and determine what we could do to develop a product and service that would solve that pain. And that took a lot of time and effort and good people to come up with that theory of action and theory of change. But to answer your question directly in terms of stakeholders and buy-in and growth, I am a huge fan of measuring what matters. OKRs, making sure that it's not worth doing if you can't measure it. And so early on in our journey, we were thinking about what would constitute measurable success in community engagement. How, in our case, it was a school-to-home communications platform that allowed administrators to send personalized voice messages out to parents in a moment's notice. So we had to say, not only was this a great technology and it was fun to use, but did it measurably improve student safety? Did it measurably engage parents, because we know a more engaged parent leads to a higher achieving student? And did it measurably increase student attendance, because we know that a lot of the K-12 systems in the United States, financing and compensation and funding is determined by by the daily attendance of those school systems. So once we were able to show a school district, LAUSD, New York City schools, 1 million student districts, that we could literally measure across all of the stakeholders how we were delivering outcomes in those three areas, that's when the sustainability, scalability, and ultimate exit happened.
All right, very, very amazing answer. And I think moving into like slightly a bit of a pivot, but still building on that. Nunzio, you mentioned when you began, you also were a student entrepreneur, which I think is a very crazy experience that often comes with its own unique challenges, in a sense. And many times, it does. I feel. I mean, like at the very least, in my tiny bit of experience compared to both of you, it can be a little bit harder convincing people as a student to buy into an idea in education itself. Yes, you would be the best stakeholder because you are the student yourself, but at times it can be a bit harder convincing people, especially stakeholders, potential investors, people, other universities in your case probably, that you would be the best person to run this. And this is a feedback that I get today, even after 7 years of running an education movement. They say, are you serious enough? Are you do you have what it takes to build a business in a way? Did you get this kind of feedback when you started out? And how did you essentially navigate that and still be able to push yourself forward and get all of these people to come and rally behind you and build a venture with you?
So completely, I think trying to start a business as a student is slightly crazy. It takes a certain mindset. I respect you as well, Harsha, for doing that. I think, in a sense, I was lucky that at the time there weren't any VCs willing to give money to any students. It was just a complete non-starter. So I couldn't even think about going out and trying to raise funding. So I had to have a business plan that would allow for organic self-funded growth. And honestly, the real benefit of being on the Wharton campus was the incredible talent that I could draw upon, who were inspired by my vision and mission, and who were willing to help me pretty much for free. I mean, I did end up paying them eventually, but at the time I didn't have to pay them because they really bought into what I was trying to achieve, and that was absolutely critical. Curious wouldn't exist today without lots of really talented, motivated young people from 1988 to 1990 who helped me to set the company.
And that is a personal story that the audience should listen to. And this is a developing story that is becoming very personal to me, Harsha, and that is youth entrepreneurship, which a lot of your audience members should perk up. I had the honor of lecturing at Wharton's LBW, Leadership in the Business World, this summer, and I met with 300 rising seniors in high school, who I can honestly say at least a dozen of them had, for the most part, better vision, mission, problem statements, value propositions, thought through decks than many of the 250 ed tech entrepreneurs that I work with annually. And I was blown away by what they're doing, how they're thinking, how fed up they are. I tried to give my lecture and then stop and listen to them and say, what could we do as old, to help? And they said, get out of our way, like let us execute. And I think Nunzio is right. Is capital is one thing, find opportunities to invest in these young entrepreneurs, but really find ways to create pathways for them to learn. Entrepreneurship should be as important as math, English language arts, and STEM in high school. We need to be teaching and funding and capitalizing opportunities and ideas. And I've started to do that intentionally through our programming at Penn GSE. We have a rule that you have to be 18 years old to compete in our milking competition. And there's important legal reasons for that. But we got to start thinking about, if you're 17 years old and a high school senior and 360 days and want to apply to the milking competition, you should be able to, and you should get the kind of support that anybody's getting in our programming. So this is very personal. We're now seeing it through even the latest midterm elections. The Gen Z won the elections. They're fed up. It's personal to me. I have, my platform was used in the last 5 school shootings that slaughtered young students. We need to find ways to support, serve, and enable disruption, innovation, and entrepreneurship for this next generation. Just have to.
I love the quote, entrepreneurship should be as important as English, maths, and STEM at high school. I think that's a really powerful quote that I don't think that many government ministers in education around the world have really thought about.
No, I definitely agree. You should get that on a T-shirt and circulate it with the conference participants. But no, it has been a huge pain point of I think a lot of the work that both of you do, in a sense, and probably some of the work that many of the student entrepreneurs we have in the audience are doing as well. It is, how do you get entrepreneurship education to mainstream curriculum? It's something that I work with today in Malaysia with our ministry doing, and it's not easy at all. It's not something that at times people can be receptive to, because many are still focused on the math, science, and English, as you said, and not that they're not important. I use my math, science, and English skills every day, but I do feel like entrepreneurship needs to be brought to the center of the conversation. So so go ahead, Nunzio.
No, I was running a government panel for our Reimagine Education conference earlier this week, and I had Satam Arora, who is from the Indian alumni and student network for UK graduates, and she was telling me that the city of Delhi is now providing funding for any for entrepreneurial ideas from any graduates from Delhi universities, which is the first time I've heard of a city sponsorship of entrepreneurship on that level, which I think is an indication that there is some attention now being given to the role of youth entrepreneurship to drive economic growth. So, I mean, I think that's very encouraging. I think it's, I certainly haven't seen the City of London doing that, or I don't think Philadelphia is doing that, but it's an indication some of these advanced thinking isn't necessarily happening in the West. I mean, I think Delhi is really ahead of a curve there.
No,
I have to say, what you're doing, Harsha, with Ascendance, I think is critically important. There are networks here, especially in the United States, the TIE system, and the NIFTY, Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, both, they do a really good job in developing systems and networks and institutionalizing youth entrepreneurship. But I think it's important to do things and that are student-led, student-driven. And in our conversations, Harsha, when I think about Ascendance, it's not just enough to think about college and career readiness. It's real-world problem solving. That was another theme that I heard when I was working with the young students through the LBW program, is that they want to solve problems. They want to be service-oriented. They want to be social impact, social entrepreneurs. And if you can give them avenues and pathways and networks and opportunities to work together, global-minded opportunities to work together in teams to solve real-world problems, SDGs is a perfect opportunity, the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. I think it's really powerful and really important. And there needs to be more opportunities to fund those platforms and develop scale around them.
So John, it's a perfect segue. If I can just say, gosh, as we were talking earlier, so QS set up a charity in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic called QS World Merit. And the purpose of that charity is to mobilize and support young people to make an impact on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have our first award program on the 9th of December at Wharton, where we're doing our student awards for QS World Merit, but we don't have a social entrepreneurship award. And so we're thinking about launching that in 2023. And my question to Harsha was, does she think it's too crowded? There are too many of these kind of awards. And what was your answer, Harsha?
Well, my answer is, I do not think it's an oversaturated space. I definitely think there is so much room to recognize these social entrepreneurs, especially but my focus would be, where is the outreach going from this? So who are the people who are involved in this award? Who are the ones who are applying, and making sure that the outreach for awards like these go out to students from different parts of the world who don't always get the recognition, who are doing the hard work, but don't always be brought in for conversations when it comes to recognition like this. So
QS has a 50 million global audience, so we're able to reach those young people for sure. We just need to. I want to make sure that anything we do is really needed and worthwhile. So I appreciate your input, and John, I welcome your input on that. And maybe we can collaborate together and devise something for December 2023.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we shall schedule another call on that outside of this summit. But one of the things that also, like in the same vein of conversation of supporting young people in the education, in the edtech space, earlier, John, you mentioned this, that a lot of Gen Z say that the best thing that can happen for them is for the other generations to get out of the way and let them execute. I don't actually believe in that. I'm going to contest that in a sense, just because I've always felt like when other generations rally behind Gen Z, that's when we're at our strongest. When we have the expertise, the connections, the networks, the people behind us, that's when we can thrive the most. So in your opinions, in a sense, what can other generations or other stakeholders in education, whether it's from schools to organizations such as QS or organizations such as Penn GSC and Catalyst, what can everyone else out there do to support young entrepreneurs today who want to go out there and make changes in spaces like education?
So I want to be clear on my get out of the way context, because I'm in violent agreement with you that there has to be this idea of working together. What they meant was, what the younger generation, as they were telling me, I'm just using my example about getting out of the way, is they're seeing too much radical bickering, especially in the political sphere, that are getting nothing done. That's the get out of the way. Anybody who wants to just argue about common sense gun reform and school violence, talk about student mental health and bicker about it in these echo chambers that constantly with both parties never get anything done. Get out of the way and let us solve it. We're the ones that are who are the most effective and most victimized by these opportunities.
And the mental health space, I think, is an area that is ripe for entrepreneurship and innovation, because it is a new pandemic. I mean, it is so widespread. I mean, in the UK, I know it's a huge problem. I believe it's a huge problem in America. And the adults are not solving it. They are not solving it. The university leaders, the vice rectors who are in their 50s and 60s are not solving it. I'm not going to solve it. John, you're not probably going to solve it either. We need young people who understand what is causing the problem to solve it, to understand how to tackle the negative impact of social media, how to provide support groups, there is a whole world of innovation and entrepreneurial opportunity to tackle that mental health issue. And I can say clearly, in my opinion, in the edtech, that is the single biggest opportunity today, because it's affecting so many people. And it's the area where there is no solution that's coming to the fore at the moment.
I have a question on that note, in a sense. One of the things that I see is there's two different types of innovation. Sometimes they intersect. But on one side, you see the technological innovations. You have tools that come out to support learning in and of itself, one type of edtech. Another one is tackling problems that previously have been gone unnoticed and unidentified, whether it's things like mental health, whether it's things like students wanting to bring entrepreneurship to the center of curriculum. These are new things that are in and of it, the problem it's trying to solve, new itself. Which one do you think is becoming more important? Technological innovation, or kind of addressing problems that have not been talked about before? And
can I go first on this one? So my view is that the edtech space is very, very saturated. And there is a very high failure rate. And actually going to market with edtech ideas is very difficult. And part of that is that everyone's trying to solve the same problems, maybe in slightly new ways, but it is kind of old wine in new bottles. And the learning, I mean, there are so many LMSs and new approaches to LMS and AI enabled LMS, and frankly everyone's still using Moodle and Blackboard and whatever, and I don't see many of these innovations actually having massive impact. So that's why I say that I think real entrepreneurship is about identifying real needs, real problems that need to be solved. The mental health issue is a real need that still has to be solved. And I would encourage young people to think of what are the new real needs. Don't try and just repackage old wine. Try and create a new category.
100% in agreement. I'd say it with a slight nuance, because we look at this a lot, and that is if you go to GSV, and you go to South by Southwest, everybody's talking about all the E's, right? Equity, efficacy, and expertise. But especially equity and efficacy, and nobody knows how to do that. How do I do equity and how do I do efficacy? Efficacy investing, 2021 was a record year by far in terms of edtech investment and the amount of capital that was coming into space, especially post-pandemic, because we saw so much disruption and we needed had the mentality of never let a crisis go to waste. So there was funding, there was capital, and the whole buzz was you have to be efficacious. And so the question became, and the research question, essential question became, how do we do efficacy? And a group of us came together on this topic, and it wasn't start with tech. It was start with a theory of action and a theory of change. So the first thing that we started looking at was the sequence by which innovation, impact, and ultimate scale of these platforms and these solutions were being developed. And the sequence tended to be, I'll just make an MVP, get a couple of clients, and then get funded. And we're saying, no. What is the theory of action? What is the theory of change? And what's the evaluative model being put behind this business plan to determine that there's actually going to be an impact? And then develop the technology, then create the prototype, create the MVP,
completely agree.
Co-constructing and co-designing that inside of the stakeholder groups that we talked about earlier, Harsha. The second prong of efficacy and really making this work on the road to, say, a unicorn or a truly transformative solution was transferability. So you get your theory of action and theory of change right. You put your evaluative model on, and you get a couple of customers in South Jersey, and you say, I'm ready for my Series A. No. The transferability of being able to do business with a small school district in New Jersey is very different than doing a business in California, and incredibly different than doing business in India, Malaysia, and Singapore, right? So the first is the sequence of getting it right, then the transferability, and then ultimately, once you have a couple of implementations with co-design and co-construction in multiple markets, you've transferred into the next core component of what I think of when I think of efficacy investing, and that is the scalability. Now, how are you putting together a team that can scale this transferable model into long-term competitive growth? And there's things that we're coaching our entrepreneurs on to get to the level of success that Nunzio has reached with QS.
No, it's true. No, very good point. And I think it's a great segue to what I also wanted to talk about on terms of scalability and planning for what happens next. Because I think a lot of people in the education space are definitely very passionate about what they do, and they want to make sure that the most kind of, I would say, impact is being able to be created out of their ventures. And both of you have taken very different paths in doing this. John, you successfully scaled your venture and you exited it. I think Pace was eventually sold for, I think, 182 million in an all-cash transaction. Very cool. For you, in a sense, for entrepreneurs who are building it and then eventually exiting it, starting there, when did you begin to start thinking about exiting and scaling, and when did these questions become important to you? Was it when you were in the early stages, mid stages? Did you always have the grand plan, or was this something that you saw as you saw the need for the work you do increase, and kind of or did you just want to transition off into something else?
Don't think that there's any right answer here, but
Yeah.
for me personally, I have the mantra of let the exit happen. Don't try to make an exit happen. If you're building a great business around KPIs and OKRs, and you're able to measure the impact that you're delivering around your theory of action and theory of change, and you can sustain growth over time, suitors will come, investors will come, acquirers will come. Now, I think it's critically important with your early lean canvas to really truly understand your problem, your solution, your TAM, SAM, SOM, really understanding the market dynamics, having a well-founded, well-rooted go-to-market strategy, beachhead marketing strategy, rooted in a lot of great customer discovery. That said, as you're starting to execute, there's certain things that I find are really indicative of a company that it's on its way to continuous growth and ultimately exit, whether it's being acquired or going through an IPO. And that is things like standardization of contracts instead of let's make a deal, right? Making sure that you're firm on what you're offering and you're selling, especially in the ed tech space. It's very easy when one district says, I want a deal, and this district says, I want, if you can really standardize your operations and standardize your agreements, that's something that's really important.
That's when you know you transition from a startup to an organization, right?
One other thing is I'm a big fan, because I know the audience kind of wants practical. What can I do practically? I'm a big fan of product-led growth. Google it, learn about it, take some master classes on it. I'm also into a new movement, and I'm working with some ed tech VCs and investors on this theory too, that we're moving beyond this notion of ARR leads to series A, B, and C. And we're looking at NRR, net recurring revenue. And that's a formula that says not only do you now have to grow revenue, but you have to upsell and you have to demonstrate renewals in such a way that customers are actually embracing your product over time. So it's not good enough to just grow annual recurring revenue. You have to be able to demonstrate that you're renewing 85% of your clients and upselling to new products and services that you're bringing to market in order to be able to demonstrate a strong value proposition that's worth investing in.
Amazing. And Nunzio, you took a different path to this, right? You built QS into an international organization that today I think has empowered over 1 billion people. You have a digital presence and events in 57 countries. At what point did you start looking at scaling? And how do you achieve scale with all of these global or like global chapters, global partnerships, while making sure it was still relevant to local communities and the things that you were doing and the information you were putting out was still applicable?
I have to be completely transparent here. Although I did a Wharton MBA, QS was a mission-led company. I have been inspired by the mission, and so that has driven everything that QS has done. And so
Very different from the.
I didn't actually go into QS saying, okay, I want to find an exit in X numbers of years' time. I wanted to build the QS brand, and I wanted to build a business that made an impact and make it successful as well. So it's a slightly different approach. What that means is we put a big focus on product-led growth, as John said, organic growth. Yeah, I think QS has a history of innovation where we've introduced a new product every year, hopefully complementary, that reinforces our strength. And we've also tried to focus on doing things. Those products have been in fields and in areas of competence where we feel we can do it better than anybody else. So being highly selective in what we've done, mission-led, and just tried to do those things better than anybody else. That hasn't been an exit mindset. I think as we've scaled as a result of that approach, we've had to go through reinventions, and probably we look today more like that classic company where we have standard contracts and long-term renewable agreements. So we've become much more standardized now. But I have to confess that in the first 15 years of QS, it was very entrepreneurial. It was very product-led. John probably would have criticized everything I was doing. but luckily it worked. And I think the fact that we were so passionate about the mission means that QS has an awful lot of trust, an awful lot of authenticity around the world, and that's a fundamental thing I'm very proud of with QS.
No, definitely, I agree, and I think both ways that you have decided to actually scale the work that each of you have been doing are very important for us to talk about. Just because not everyone wants to exit, not everyone wants to grow it to international heights. Different people have different ways that they look at their ventures, and I'm just so glad that we have both of your perspectives on this, because I think that for all of us who are starting to think about these questions, it really helps us kind of at least gives us the content to digest and come up
a
with
lot of life choices. You have to do that deep self-assessment. What do you really want? What are you looking to get out of your career? And if you're honest with yourself and you do that self-assessment, then I think it puts you on the right track. Because the most important thing is you enjoy what you do. Right. And I've had a blast with QS. John's obviously had a blast with Pace, and if you think clearly about what you want from your life, it can be great.
Yeah, so I would going right into Simon Sinek, right? What is your why? We may have lost Harsha, but what is your why? And there's some really great research and some great books out there to develop your purpose-driven life and trying to figure out what is your vocation. I also want to say to Nunzio's point on being mission-driven, Harsha, because you were sensing with the Wharton mission-driven. Being mission-driven doesn't necessarily mean you're not profit-driven. Being mission-driven can very much be built around strong growth, built around profits and dominating industries. It just really, it's important to develop the mission, convey your vision, and determine what your values are, and bringing in the systems and leadership on down, distributing the leadership who are walking the walk on that vision, mission, and values that I think is so important, at least in my experience, because Nunzio said, I probably would definitely not. There's room for grittiness and getting it wrong, right? The other one besides Simon Sinek, I'm a big Eric Ries fan, which is, the lean startup. Failing fast, failing smart, knowing when to pivot, knowing when to learn from your mistakes, being resilient and perseverant, critically important. And I just speak to it in terms of my occasional success when I've had a couple of exits. That was the formula, is really getting smart about making mistakes and then going in a different direction intentionally.
Yeah.
Getting smart about making mistakes. Okay, definitely agree. That's a good one. Second T-shirt, we'll put that on. Final question, in a sense, for our panel. As we wind down, we spoke about so many different things that I think are all very valuable to edtech entrepreneurs, to education entrepreneurs today. If you had to distill one thing, or in one sentence, what does an entrepreneur in this space need to succeed?
I would say, especially young entrepreneurs, is get a mentor early. Get somebody that is a great advisor, a great listener, and there's volumes of books on what makes a good guide, advisor, and mentor. I personally think it's not somebody who imparts their knowledge. Harsha, as you're building your business, you need to do this. It's a person that is positioning you to collide into the answers, right? Have collisions with people that can help, kind of nudge you in different directions, point out when they think that you're maybe making a mistake and you need to pivot. You might be a little bit bullheaded. And ultimately, I like to say, being really focused on demonstrating the paradox of humility and will. I say that a lot. That's really important. When I see an entrepreneur that's demonstrating the paradox of humility and will, what is that? Humility is, I need to be coachable. I need to learn. I need somebody to help me succeed. That's humility. That's coachability. But will, and as I'm being coachable, I'm ready to run through walls and do whatever it takes to be successful. I see a lot of entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, who have humility, kind of afraid and nervous, but really coachable, but don't have that will. I also see a lot of entrepreneurs that have that will and say, I'm going to do it my way or the highway. And I see them fritter off because they're not coachable. They're not humble. They're not recognizing that they can take the imparted knowledge from mentors and advisors and really apply it in ways that are going to make them ultimately successful. So the paradox of humility and will: be humble, be coachable, but also be committed to doing, and gritty, demonstrating grit, the great Angela Duckworth, right? Being gritty and doing whatever it takes to be successful.
No, very, very well said. Nunzio, shall we end us off with some words of wisdom?
I think John's coaching so many young people that he's an excellent guide to answer that, or excellent person to answer that question. I think I would reiterate what he said earlier as well, though. Go back to the why. Have your why, and a why that can inspire others, and that really addresses a real need, is so important and so overlooked. So many people are just trying to do something slightly better, and I don't think that's what society needs. I think have a really important why, and again, I agree with what John said. Test and learn, fail fast. You're not going to get it right first time. You need to be, if you are passionate about what you're doing, accept that you've got to learn, adapt on a journey.
Okay, very well, and very well said. And I think between both of those answers, we have at least what we need to get started, get on the right track, and hopefully we in the audience can change the world and be the next game changers in this space. So
Absolutely.
thank you both so much for being on this panel. I truly appreciate talking to both of you, and I think that there's so much more that we can all learn from you that I'm so sad we won't be able to go into. But thank you for your time and being here with us today. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have enjoyed talking to you both.
It's been great to speak to you both. Really enjoyed it.
And the audience should reach out to both of us. Love to link LinkedIn connections and whatever we can do to support. We got you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Bye. And passing it back to our MCs.
Bye-bye.